How's everyone doing? I haven't seen you in a while. I'm Stacey Wilson-Hunt from New York Magazine and Vulture. I'm very happy to be here. What did you think of the movie? It's an amazing story, huh? Very good story. I'm very honored tonight to be speaking to the star of this film, Bana. Please come on out.
Thank you.
I feel like we're really close, so I'm going to slide over here. Okay, that's a little bit better. that felt like very, very close quarters.
Too tight a two-shot for you?
Yeah. We're going to have a staring contest or something. So before we get to the movie, I always like to talk a little bit about your journey to this point. And I followed your career for a long time, but I've always interested to know and find out how you sort of went from comedy to playing a lot of serious parts. You were a pretty funny young man. I saw a lot of funny clips of you online in various shows and such. But I also found a really funny interview that you did where you visited a bar where you used to work and you showed the interviewer that you were a busboy. So tell me a little bit about then how that led to comedy.
Yeah, well, I busted in through the side door, for those of you who don't know. So my introduction to the business was through comedy. I was a stand-up comedian in Australia for many, many years initially. And I can't even really remember how that came about, other than I had a feeling it was the only thing I could do. And I had people encourage me, which is kind of interesting, right? I mean, I was really interested to hear what Jordan Peele was saying this week about him finding his voice through other people to keep writing that script. And so I was a bit of an idiot at school and used to do impressions and all that sort of stuff. And I think it's kind of interesting that I end up gravitating to what people told me I was good at, but I never really had huge aspirations of being a comedian. Acting really interested me. So I did stand-up comedy, and then I moved into sketch comedy, television sketch comedy, which is where I really found my feet, because my brain was more prolific as a sketch comedy writer and performer than it was stand-up. And once I was doing sketch comedy, oddly enough, the show that I was working on had a lot of actors on it and not that many comedians on it. It was only 2 or 3 out of, I'd say, 12 of us that were comedians. And so I just learnt off the classically trained actors that were on the cast. And after a while, I was like, there's not a huge amount of difference between what we're doing and what they're doing, and maybe I could act if I wanted to. So I didn't really have a huge kind of like smokescreen mirror curtain between the two, and I just kind of arrogantly felt as though I could take the leap, and that it was mainly about perception more than anything else. You know, you're either acting to get a laugh or you're acting to elicit a response or an emotion, and I just kind of refused to cloud it too much. So that's kind of how the jumps came.
And what was the entertainment business like back then? Was this mostly in Melbourne, or did you go to Sydney to try to get more opportunities?
No, Melbourne's the main city in Australia. No, they're kind of equal in entertainment terms, but Melbourne was the comedy capital, and I was lucky enough. I sort of started stand-up during, it was good and bad timing. It was I entered the workforce during the recession, which was terrible, but comedy was having a boom in Australia, and in Melbourne in particular. And we had a lot of great live venues, and I would never have got my start today because none of those venues exist, or very few of them do. When I started out, you know, working for nothing as a tryout, then you got the $30 spot, then you got the $60 spot, then you got the $120 spot, and that structure just, I don't think, really exists as much anymore. So a lot of it was about timing. Comedy was booming. We made great sketch comedy in Australia. I mean, as good as anywhere. And I was able to ride the back of great directors and great cast members and great writers and co-stars. So it really was all about that.
It worked out. So the first thing I saw you in was this crazy movie, Chopper. Have you guys seen this movie? It's crazy. That's the only word I can think of to describe it. And I think if it came out today, you would be a lock for an Oscar nomination, because this performance is really, really stunning. What were your biggest fears in taking on something so big, a true story, transforming your body, kind of like putting yourself at the forefront of the story, which I'm sure was controversial to a lot of people. What did that feel like at that time?
It was very controversial. It was based on a real person who was an extremely violent real criminal who at that stage had completed many, many years in prison and was released. So that was a bit intimidating because I was playing him. He was very unstable, and his mind would change from day to day whether he liked what you were doing or not. So it was quite intimidating. And the movie itself was controversial, because, our film structure in Australia, a lot of those sort of films rely heavily on government funding. So any independent film coming out of Australia has a lot of government money invested, and a lot of people were not happy about the fact that we were making this film, and they were confused and a little bit pissed off that I was cast in a role, because they then assumed that it was going to be too much of a comedy. And they didn't really know who Andrew Dominik was, because he hadn't made a film yet, and they had no idea how serious and how good a handle he was going to have on the subject matter. So it was very controversial, and we nearly got dropped a couple of times. We went into turnaround and we nearly disappeared, which was great for me because I spent basically nearly 2 years in prep. It was the longest period of time I've ever had to prepare for a character. I was ready after a month, by the way. But whatever.
To gain the weight. You gained like 30, 40 pounds or something?
Yeah, it was about 30 pounds, I think, wow. Thereabouts.
And how did you do that? I always love to know what you put yourself through, quote unquote, eating donuts, etc.
Well, indie film, right? So we shot for 4 weeks, and we only had a 4-week production break for me to get fat for the next 4 weeks, which is not long, right? Seriously, for it to read on camera. So it was very ugly. It was gross. It was gluttonous, but it was worth it, and it showed. But I kept it going during the second lot of filming. So by the end of that second 4-week block, it was quite substantial. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't do it again. I wouldn't do it my age now, but I was younger then and had the time to do it.
Work it off. Right. Probably felt like Morgan Spurlock felt at the end of his documentary.
Very similar. Yeah, I didn't have the luxury of, taking toxicology tests and checking my iron levels. Right. And it was just like, am I fat yet? And, is it showing on screen? No, go and eat some more donuts, get some more sodium in you, beer. It was everything, meat pies, beer, donuts, French fries, burgers, just fish and chips, like beer.
Oh my God. Beer was definitely involved.
Yeah.
The sacrifices you guys make for your craft, it's really amazing. And I've always wondered this, what kind of attention did you get after that? Was Hollywood knocking on your door? Were they like, who is this crazy guy? When they saw this movie, I mean, did you have agents calling you, or did you kind of still exist in the Australia business?
Yeah, so at that stage in Australia, I was well known just for comedy. So I was already established there, but not as an actor. And here I'd had a couple of people knock on the door potentially, but at a very arm's length degree for TV stuff and for comedy. So I'd already been here and I'd taken a few meetings and I was trying to get my head around the television structure here, the pilot season stuff, because at the time I thought maybe I might get headhunted for SNL or something, because it would have been a very easy transition to do what I was doing in Australia to a show like SNL. And then I heard about these crazy long contracts and I was like, wow, how do people do that? And like, as if you should be worried about that. But
did you audition for pilots, and did you actually?
No, I didn't. No, I just came and I met a few people and stuff. And then I went back to Australia, and then the chopper thing happened. And the first thing was we got accepted into Telluride. So it was my first film festival was Telluride. And then we went from Telluride to Toronto, and I got a little bit more word of mouth. And then as it sometimes happens, I don't even know if it matters that much what the quality of the work is, but your name becomes a commodity, and then suddenly people are headhunting you, and I couldn't even tell if they'd seen the film or not, but it didn't matter, And so off the back of that, I then searched for an agent and spent about 2 weeks here meeting with everyone, talking to, and I was determined to leave town without hiring anyone, because I really wanted to get, it was such a mystery, this town and how it worked and the business, and I really needed to get my head around it, and I didn't want to walk away with an agent, a manager, or this or that, because I was like, I can't even work out how the whole business works. So after 2 weeks I decided who to sign with, and then went back to Australia and ended up at what was then William Morris, and then for a long time I didn't even have a lawyer, and then I slowly added a lawyer, and then I added a publicist, and like try to keep it really lean and mean for as long as I could.
And tell me what it was like to be cast by Steven Spielberg in Munich. Was that a major turning point for you?
That was a good day. That was...
I have a feeling that's a good phone call to receive.
It was incredible. I was actually here. I'm trying to remember. The circumstances were kind of crazy. So I was here to reshoot a fight scene in Troy between myself and Brad Pitt, because
on a bad day, right there.
We had to shut down the production because it was a hurricane. And it was the only scene left to film was the big fight scene at the end. So we got sent home and then came back 4 weeks later to go to Cabo to shoot this scene. And so I get to LA and the stunt director's like, well, you guys got to do some rehearsal before we, you're up to speed, but let's just do a refresher. And Brad walked in with a cast on his leg and he'd done his Achilles but hadn't told anyone. And so I was here and I'm like, dude, could you have not told me before I got on a plane from Australia? So they literally sent me home again. But while I was on that trip, my agent got a call saying, Stephen wants to meet with Eric. He's shooting The Terminal out in the desert somewhere. And we didn't know exactly what it was about, but he'd done some snooping and found out that the Munich topic may be one. And I, by complete coincidence, had already read George Jonas's book, Vengeance, and thought it was incredible. So I go out there and in the lunch break, I sit down and meet with Stephen and have this conversation. He's telling me about the Munich Olympics and I'm like, yeah, I remember that. I remember reading the book, blah, blah, blah. And he said, so I'd love you to play this character of Avner. And I hopped in the car and I was driving back to LA and my agent called me and he said, how do you think it went? And I was like, I don't know. I think he was offering me a role in the film, but I'm not 100% sure. And he's like, dude, you got the part, and I was like, by myself, in the middle of the desert, I was like, oh my God, Jesus, like, this is incredible. And so it really was. It was, and I was just sort of in shock, and it was also because growing up with like 70s movies as my favorite kind of period, I was like, I'm going to be in a thriller that's set in the 70s by Steven Spielberg. It was all kind of just too much to take on.
That's amazing. And how nervous were you on that first day? Had you built yourself up enough to like accept, I'm in this movie, I'm the lead? I always wonder what goes through people's minds on that very first day of work.
Yeah, it was intimidating. I arrived late because it was the only time it's ever happened in my whole life that I worked back to back, and I've never done it before. And I've always had really big gaps between films. But I was on a film that was shooting here that then pushed, and we ran way over. And I literally had to. I did a 16-hour day here in LA. Hopped in a car, went to the airport, flew to Malta, got off the plane. They put my family in one car, took them to the hotel, took me to the set, cut my hair, put some clothes on me, straight into a night shoot. So I literally worked on 2 films on both sides of the world, and the one for me, which was the one shooting day. And it's a crazy story. I wouldn't believe that if anyone told me that. And it's never come close to happening again. But so I was just too kind of frazzled to be anything other than just, what are we doing? And can I get a Coke? And then, just to stay awake. And then you hear that thing, can we get a Coke, get a channel 2, channel 1, we can go to 1, go to 2. Can we get a Coke for Eric? Can we get a Coke? Can we get a Coke for Eric, please? Can we get a Coke? I'm like, oh, fuck. Oh, no. They're going to think I'm this diva that has to have a Coke before the camera rolls. I'm like, I just want to stay awake.
You knew then that you were number 1 on the call sheet when that many people were trying to get you a Coke.
There's nothing worse than hearing that chain of, go 2, go 3. Yeah, we'll get a Coke, please. We'll get a Coke. What? No, we haven't got a Coke. We've got to do a Coke. Well, you better get a Coke, mate. You better get a Coke.
Well, people ask for a lot crazier, way more ridiculous
And I haven't
things.
asked for a Coke since, I swear to God.
Carry my own water to set. Always travel with Coke. And how did your life change after that movie? It was obviously nominated for Academy Awards. It's just such a stunning movie. I'm just thinking about it right now. Was that really sort of when you thought, gosh, I'm in the business, I've been accepted and welcomed? Or were you still struggling with, am I Australian? Am I in Hollywood? Did you kind of wonder where you fit in?
I always felt like it was really important to never ever even try and get a perspective on that, and I still don't, because I think it's an amorphous thing, and I think it changes, and I think it's a dangerous thing to try and get your head around. And so I've never tried to play with the devil of coming to grips with that, because the reality is it can change very quickly. And so all I knew was I just was in the moment that this is as good as it gets. The actual experience of shooting the film was the greatest professional moment of my life in terms of the experience of making a film. To work with Janusz Kaminski, to work with Stephen, the cast was insane. The locations were incredible. We worked really fast. It was a pretty quick shoot for a film of that scale that had incredible nervousness and energy all through it. There was no time to stop and think about anything, and it was just the time of my life. So I think I just tried to just be in the moment of what it was, without overanalyzing it, too much at the time.
Smart. That's good advice. So we come to The Forgiven, a very tough story about a tough moment in history. What appealed to you about this story, despite the fact that you had to shoulder a lot of this very unpleasant prep work and just unpleasant state of mind during the course of filming? And you told me earlier that you did not rehearse with Forrest.
Well, I guess, as a lot of you would know, I mean, if you read that script as an actor, you're just going, is this vaguely possible that I can do this? Like, is this opportunity presenting itself? Is this person allowing me to play this character? Is this film going to be made? And in this day and age, as you all know, these sort of films are harder and harder to get made. So I just always saw it as a miracle. I was blessed the fact that Forrest was already attached, and I knew that was going to really help get the film made, although it still, took them quite a lot of time. So I was overwhelmed by the opportunity, just as someone that works in the business. And then came the realization of, wow, these words are incredible. I thought the script was really beautiful, really powerful, but I was quite intimidated, obviously, for many reasons. So I think it was probably the toughest character I've had to get my head around playing. And I really had to try and understand as much as I could about South African history to have any chance at all of portraying such a vile person. And so that's what I did. I just threw myself into the reading and the talking and the watching, trying to just get up to speed with where his warped sense of reality had emanated from, because otherwise I didn't think I stood a chance.
And what surprised you the most about what you learned about what happened during that time? Because I have to admit, there was so much of this story I didn't know. I didn't really fully understand what Tutu's role was in this whole thing. I grew up hearing his name, and I actually didn't really know what he did. Yeah,
so Nelson Mandela, when apartheid came to an end, came up with this idea of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and Desmond Tutu was in charge of that. And the idea wasn't just about seeking retribution and having people put away. It was which really blew me away was the notion that this would be part of the healing process of the nation, and I've just found that so incredible and beautiful, and that people's stories would be heard, and that was part of the healing process. And in some cases, people's crimes would be pardoned as a result of them being politically motivated, and that was on both sides. There was some incredible crimes that were committed that people were pardoned for. So, I mean, I was coming from so far back in terms of knowledge base of these specific things and the TRC and all that. So it was a very steep learning curve. But I think at this time it was particularly, I think, more interesting and challenging. And I love the notion that you have two people who could not be further apart, and they're forced to come together, and can one of them be moved even a degree or two? And obviously we don't even realise that Blomfeld has been moved until after his death, and it's such a minute amount. And even there, Roland was very careful for it not to be too much, and even down to the specific wording of, this is not, I think I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure my character in voiceover says, this is not an apology, but a reparation. So he was really, really careful about calibrating that, so it wasn't over the top and it wasn't too much, and it felt real.
It could have definitely become theatrical, and I think it actually stayed very real. What was it like working with Forrest? He seems to be a dream, I would imagine, as an actor, but that could just be me projecting.
No, it was. It was an interesting, I wouldn't say a dance that we were doing, but I was so respectful of his process, and his process was different to mine in terms of, he had so much prosthetic makeup to deal with, and I saw his character being assembled in the makeup trailer, before he even arrived, and the wig and the nose and this and that. I'm like, wow, it's going to be a lot of time in the chair. I'm playing Blomfeld. I'll just grow a moustache and we'll just... So there was no time really for kind of mucking around. We were given the opportunity. We had rehearsal time, but we decided that was just going to be conversations. And Roland, who is just the most exquisite man and just the most incredible, soulful director. And one day we were sitting there and he said, what do you guys want to do about these massive scenes? Do you want to rehearse them? I'm happy to rehearse them. And that, when you read that script, that's got ad nauseum rehearsal written all over it, right? As an actor, you go, we are going to pound these scenes to death before we shoot them. And there was this 30 seconds of silence between Forrest and I was sort of feeling him out and he was probably feeling me out, and we both just went, no, it's okay. It's okay. And I'm so glad we didn't, because we ran the scenes top to tail. Roland gave us the option of breaking them down into sections, which we both did not want to do. And so literally the first time he spoke as Tutu was when he sat down in front of me and the camera was rolling. We did a positional rehearsal for camera. We didn't speak. And I think a lot of that's in the film, by the way. And so the first time he heard me speak was on film, and the first time I heard him speak was on film. And I think it takes a really special director to have the confidence and the trust to do that. And I'm trying to think if I've worked at Spielberg did that as well, in terms of not rehearsing us specifically before the scenes. And I do think it takes someone with immense self-belief and confidence to do that.
Just cast well. That's the first. That's
and
the first step.
I think I've gone a really long way around talking about Forrest. He was just incredible and was so well prepared and was so good to play with and act off. And we were incredibly respectful of how difficult our jobs were. That we sort of gave each other that space, and there was the odd nod at the end of takes and so forth. Because so much of what I was saying felt so vile, and at first you're just like, Jesus, am I going to offend someone on the set? You're literally this is just so awful, particularly in the prison when I go into the cells and I have to say what I say to some of those gang members who were real gang members who were rehabilitated and doing acting and so forth. But there was this really kind of spirit amongst them. It was just like, fucking own it, and I knew that by owning it and just by not apologizing for it and by really going for it, that it was actually a more respectful thing to do, rather than sort of feeling as though you felt awkward about it. So that was just something that just sort of came from the energy of the room.
Yeah, those actors really owned it. I believed them.
So did I.
Yeah,
So did I.
You could tell they were infusing some real life experiences into their performance.
I would lose some of my crew on a day-to-day basis, and I'm not joking. Day 3, some of my gang members would disappear, and I'd say, "Where's so and so? He's not coming in today, mate. He's not coming back." And part of me was saying, "Don't ask, don't ask, don't ask why." Why? I can't say why, but anyway, yeah. Occasionally we lost a couple along the way, but it was interesting. They were very forthcoming with their advice and ideas and feedback. And Roland, again, I can't speak more highly of him. He was incredible with all those men, and it was such a charged environment. They're all suffering from a version of PTSD. They've all been in that particular maximum suit. We were filmed in Polesmore Prison in Cape Town, in the real jail. Most of them had been through there. We were shooting in cells that they'd lived in some cases for years. and you could physically see the reaction. And he just gently conducted everyone beautifully and had such respect for them and them for him. I think if someone had to come in with an iron fist and kind of alpha male and tried to really control that environment, it would have been an absolute nightmare.
He was the perfect guy to direct this movie. Has this story made you rethink just redemption? You know, who can be forgiven, what we can forgive? This is obviously a time in our world where we all mitigate these questions. Like, what am I willing to let go? What is so terrible that we can't forgive someone?
Yeah, I don't think I do that well. I don't think you really know until you're truly tested. And I think it's different for everybody. It's a hard question to answer. I'm blown away by the notion of it, and I'm blown away by the level at which some people who are deeply religious or not can take it on board as a concept and actually live it. The whole film, by the way, emanated from Roland Joffé seeing an interview with a woman whose child had been murdered during the apartheid period and refused to hate the murderer as a result because she refused to wrap up the death of her child in that emotion. And that's where the germ of the idea for the film came from Roland.
Before we get to audience questions, I wanted to ask one last question of my own, which is, do you think you'll do comedy again? You worked with Judd Apatow and Ricky Gervais in the last decade, which I assume you enjoyed. Do you see that again?
I've seen this movie. I don't understand why I don't get sent more comedy.
Problem is you're good at both, and they don't know what to send you.
My drama pile is this high. My comedy pile is this high. I don't know. I mean, I'm always open to it. I'm always open to everything other than musical. My friend Hugh has got that market cornered. So, yeah, I try and be open. I would always be open to a comedy. I get them sent occasionally, but my thinking is I don't want to do a comedy for the sake of it. I'll only ever do it if I feel like I can add something to it. I feel like there are plenty of people that can do that stuff. But I would love to. Pardon me, if the right project came along. Special Correspondence, one I did with Ricky for Netflix, was a hell of a lot of fun, and I absolutely adore Ricky and his work. So that was again a really wonderful opportunity. But I think it's important just to keep the door open, be open, be open-minded to literally anything and everything but musicals.
Okay, so no musicals, and ideally it would shoot in Melbourne.
Never happened. The last time I went to bed and put my head on my pillow, woke up and went to work as an actor was exactly 18 years ago. I haven't done it since. So the notion of shooting something in my hometown is completely foreign. The last time I did a film in Australia, I was playing a Hungarian migrant, and we were shooting about 3 hours out of town, so I was living in the country. So I'm always pretty much away from home. I don't mind. I think it's a great way of my life is just completely disconnected. I don't try and maintain any of the contacts that I have in my normal life. I just completely switch off. And I think that's a luxury, and I think I would find it hard if I lived in LA and I was shooting a film in LA. I think that's a real acting effort to like park your life that's just around the corner whilst you're doing a film. I think that would take a lot of energy.
Well, you have a nice separation between work and life, which is good.
It's like 16 hours of flying. Yeah.
So Rob would like to know, since Chopper, what has been your most satisfying role? You may have already mentioned it. But.
It's always hard to have these on record, isn't it? Most satisfying. Look, I think a lot of them have been satisfying for different reasons. And I think a lot of the time, the performance that you think is good might be completely different to what someone else thinks is good because you're viewing it in the context of your life and what you were going through at the time. So sometimes it may not be at all a flashy thing. It may be a case of, wow, I survived that. I was not having a great time. I was not collaborating well with the director. We were clashing about the material. Somehow I managed to eke something out of it, and it's kind of okay. Like in some instances, you might feel like that's a bigger achievement than something that's more obvious. So I think there's a couple. I think there might be a couple of them there somewhere. But in terms of just pure, unadulterated, which movie am I buying a ticket for? I think it would be Munich. Yeah.
How does the Hulk figure into that whole scenario?
Look, I did not have a great time on that film, and it's been well documented. I think it was a big jump for me. It was a big jump to go from total character actor kind of stuff to that, which was in a lot of ways very, very different to that, but it was a very unique opportunity with a very interesting director. But I mean, as an actor, it wasn't a great experience, and it's not a piece of work that I look upon as being, my finest piece of work. But the weird irony is that Steven Spielberg says that's why he cast me in Munich. So I go, really? Like, how does that work? But it just goes to show you don't know what people are taking from your performances, and you don't know what little morsel someone's looking for. You don't know what it is in your character, whether it be 2 scenes, 1 scene, the whole movie. You have no idea what someone potentially is going to take away from it. So in some ways, the one of the performances that I'm in some ways least proud of, not embarrassed by, but not as proud of as others. I wouldn't have one of my most proud pieces of work without it. So that was a bit confusing when I heard that.
No, that's very cool. And actually, you could argue that Hulk was a harder job to do for that reason.
Absolutely, way harder.
Yeah.
Way on a scale of like effort required. Going on that analogy that I gave you earlier, no doubt, I would say 5, 6, 7, 8 times harder, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
AJ would like to know, what has been your most challenging moment ever in this business?
Yeah, have one answer to 2 questions. Most challenging what
moment, or maybe a period in your career, or maybe when you were starting out. I mean, you talked a lot about navigating the business and not really knowing how to forge kind of your own path.
Look, this sounds really lame, and I don't mean to stand here as someone who has been lucky enough to have my career and at all complain about anything. But I think the thing that I've always found hardest, without a doubt, is being a long way from home on your own for extended periods of time. And I don't think it matters what kind of film you're on. I don't think it matters what kind of role you're doing. That feeling of like walking off the set and having to go and find something to eat and go back to your hotel room and learn your lines for the next day, like that drudge. I think that's probably the thing that I've had to like really try and work out tools for, and like try and find my happy place, and like try and find a system, and like that's always been a struggle, and still is today, like years and years and years later. But I'd say that's the thing that I struggle with the most, is just, like it's a very, very solitary job, even though you're on set with a lot of people, usually because you're the out-of-towner. I'm always the out-of-towner, right? So everyone else is going home, and you're the one who's like not from there, so you're sort of on your own most of the time.
They don't invite you over for dinner ever? Any of these people you work with?
Not often.
That's not very nice.
No. Occasionally.
They know you're all alone at the Four Seasons, wherever you're staying.
It is always more fun to be on location where everyone's on location, there's no doubt. But if you're shooting on a film where you're the out-of-towner, it's definitely harder, for sure.
Well, hopefully future crew members see this interview and invite you over, because that's just not nice. Victor would like to know, what would you have done if you weren't an actor?
That's easy. So when I'm not working, I have a really deep passion for cars and motorcycles, and I work on them and I build them, and have since I was a kid. And so I have my dad to thank, who was a Croatian immigrant who came to Australia, and the thought of his son holding a wrench for a living sent shivers down his spine, and he rallied against it. But I wanted to leave school when I was 15 to do my motor mechanic apprenticeship, and he was the one who said I had to stay at school until the end of high school. So I probably would have ended up in that trade somewhere. I'd like to think I'd be an engineer at a Formula One team or something like that, but I may just be at a garage somewhere in Melbourne. And happy, by the way. Completely happy.
A lot of happy people who do those jobs.
Yeah.
Laurel would like to know if you have any plans to write in the near future.
Yeah. So I did a documentary some years ago called Love the Beast, which was kind of essentially about a car, but not, based on an idea that I had. And I would like to next time direct a narrative feature as opposed to a documentary feature, because I found, as I was working on that project, I thought, how amazing would it be to write something down and people actually go and do it, as opposed to in a documentary when you're trying to assemble a story based on things that you have. So I do write occasionally, and there may be something I'm working on now, but I would like to direct something, and it would have to be something that would come from myself. I don't read other people's scripts and think I want to direct this. I don't have that sort of eye. By that I mean I think if I was going to go to the trouble of trying to direct a film, it would have to be something of my own voice, not someone else's.
That makes sense. And last question from Nick. When having an especially difficult time finding the right approach to a scene or moment, what do you find is the most reliable thing to focus on in order to work through that?
I guess telling yourself that you have to afford yourself the luxury of making a mistake, because I think we can freeze ourselves to thinking that there is a correct way of doing that scene, when there really isn't. There's just a way that the director and the editor prefer over another one. And I think it's so hard to try and reimagine the line the way that you had it in your head in the hotel last night, and it's not quite coming out that way in the moment, or the scene's not working, or the person you're acting opposite isn't giving you what you thought they were going to give you. I think the hardest thing in that case is to try and free yourself and say that you have the luxury of making a mistake, and you have the luxury of doing a bad take or two, and always communicating it to the director. I would never be shy about saying, I think that sucked, and can I please, I've got to know. And I've rarely come across a director who doesn't want to engage you in that next take if they can see that you're not happy with something you've just done, and that you may have a better idea. Sometimes it's easier said than done, and I think sometimes getting frustrated can really affect us. Can really make you feel less loose and less able to be free and in the moment. But I'd try and be honest, and I would just share how I'm feeling with someone else, and try and find a looser way into the next take. That I'll bang my head against the wall a few times, perhaps.
And I have a burning question that I've always wanted the answer to, which is, why are Australians so good at accents? Why can you do every accent that you attempt and it sounds flawless?
Bloody practice, okay? and don't think we're not envious. When I see actors just do their native tongue, film after film, year after year, I'm so envious. I am so envious. So the reality is that for us, it's just necessity. If we want a career and we want to work outside of Australia, and if we were all in Australia, we'd all be starving. None of us would be able to survive in the business if we were all back in Australia. We'd be eating each other. So we have had to learn how to do accents, and I think it's an interesting thing, because it really, for myself, it's really been a great thing for my career, because it also means that someone in the UK is not scared to take a risk on you. Someone's not going to go like that. Can he do South African? Will he be open to the idea? They just know. Just come and knock on the door, and if I think I can do it, I'll put my hand up. So necessity is the answer, and maybe we've just grown up knowing that that's expected of us. We enter the business knowing that we stand no chance of speaking in our native tongue.
Wow.
We do. I mean, it's the truth.
Do Australians still see yourselves as the perennial underdogs? Because I think you're the best. I think there isn't an Australian actor working today who I don't think is great. Like I see you as almost this just like incredible troupe of performers and artists. I don't know. Aren't Australians the best? Just the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're always fun too. Always great.
No, and I do get blown away by. I can't believe how many of them came from soaps and stuff, and then they get a great opportunity bang, So I'm always blown away by that. So yeah, I don't know what the maybe you just need to give more Americans a chance. Maybe we've had our run now. Like
Yes.
I have many times thought, really, there isn't an American for this part? Or I'm not going to say it, right? But there isn't a Brit to play Henry VIII, and there isn't a German guy to play that, and there isn't okay.
We've had enough opportunity. We're good for a while. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming. We learned a lot.
Thanks
Thank you
for
guys.
coming.
It was
Really
great.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.